Dr. Diana, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Starting Over podcast. We are going to be dealing with a subject which so many people are currently struggling with, and that is, how on earth do we find balance in life? And is balance even something that is plausibly achievable? A question that I and many other people, I'm sure, continuously ask ourselves. Do you think balance is achievable?
Well, it's a good question for me because I'm also a practitioner of yoga in addition to being a psychologist. And if you think about taking a balance pose, whether if it's just standing on one leg or doing a yoga balance pose, there's a lot of wobble. It's a lot of back and forth to find your center. And so I see balance as more of being in those micro adjustments of moving back and forth with a solid aligned center. And sometimes it looks balanced on the outside, but sometimes it looks quite wobbly on the outside. As we get practiced over time, maybe those wobbles aren't as big. Maybe you're not falling over and they're much more subtle. But that's how I would describe balance in my own life or working with my clients. How do you reorient back to your center again?
Mm. And what do you personally do to stay balanced?
Lots of things. I do micro, meso, and macro things, right? So micro things are, I really value looking out at nature and being surrounded by nature. So for me, I find balance just as you would if you were trying to do a balance pose. You look at a spot that's not wobbling, right? So looking or connecting with things that give me a source of balance in my life. So for me, it would be looking out at the big oak tree that's outside that feels really solid and centered and strong. That might be a micro thing that I'll do throughout my day. And there is some psychological research on fractals in nature, which are those repeating patterns, like the patterns of the petals of a rose or the patterns of the leaves of a succulent, which we have a lot here in sort of the more arid climate of Santa Barbara. That when you look at a repeating pattern or the curled up little fern leaf, it actually activates parts of our brain that are more relaxed and calm. It's really
Does it?
nice for our body. It's really restorative. So I'll do that. I'll look for repeating patterns in nature. On a more meso level, on a daily level, spending an hour in the morning before kids are up is my time. And I studied and have been practicing under the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist teacher, for a long time. And one of the things that they practice at the monastery that I like to go and visit and do retreats at is something called noble silence. So I practice that in the morning. I have a noble silence. Nobody talks to me before I go down to my little space and I do a little meditation, and then I come up, and then we can most of the time it's because I'm up earlier than everyone. But my husband knows, give her space. So that's a more meso practice. And then macro practices are things like going on retreats or doing more restorative, time with friends, things like that.
And I'm hearing you're probably pretty disciplined on the front of, I'm not going to pick up my telephone first thing in the morning and have all of that input either.
Well, I'm pretty disciplined, but I've had experiences where it started to creep in because one of the ways that I track my meditation practice is through an app called Insight Timer. And it's actually a place where I have meditations that I offer others as well. Insight Timer is an app. There's a lot of other apps on there on your phone. And so I'd open up my phone and I started to notice this tendency. I'll just check the news or I'll just, check my email. And then before you know it, a few minutes are gone or 20 minutes are gone. And that was my noble silence that I just gave up to an app that I didn't really need to be checking. So that's one of those rebalancing moves. Like we notice, oh, I've got enough balance here. And it's not that I'm bad because we all do it. It's noticing that we've done it. And then how is this helping me, or is it actually not helping me in terms of the rest of my day? And I could feel a difference in my day if I spend 20 minutes on another app besides my meditation app first thing. So coming back again to rebalance, recalibrate back to my center over and over again. And again, we can do that in little ways, but then there's big ways we get unbalanced as well. And we need to find our way back, start
Yeah,
over again.
exactly. And perfect is entirely unachievable in this whole process. So it is in what you say, in those small daily actions, the small little maneuvers, and giving ourselves grace, which we will come to, because self-compassion is a big part of your work and something that many of us don't don't do enough of. Don't give ourselves enough credit. Don't talk to ourselves nicely enough. But before we go to that, you say that many of us feel like we don't have enough time. We rush through life. We feel scattered. We feel dissatisfied. And on the flip side, we put off things that matter to us because we think we have all the time in the world to get to them. I think this really sums up this idea of balance as well. And when I'm thinking on balance in general, I've heard, and you can see if you agree with this, is it in your opinion possible to have this daily micro adjustment movement to stay generally on center, generally in balance? Or do we have to accept that there's going to be seasons of our life where this is, okay, head down, you need to go hard for a month or two, but then you need to be quite strict with yourself about giving yourself that rest period? What's your
Absolutely.
perspective? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've written a book or had a baby or trained for a athletic event or started a new job, these are periods of time where you may be prioritizing one domain of your life and putting a lot of energy into one domain. And so the other domains of your life may not be getting as much of you. Right. And for me, that becomes a question of the concept that I've gotten more interested in, which is a concept of wise effort. How are we using our energy and why are we putting it in the places that we are? And it may be that it's not all balanced. It's not like you're perfectly, spending this much time with your family and this much time on your job and then, this much time exercising, that there's periods of time where you may choose not to move your body because you're focusing on something else. And that, as long as it's aligned with your values, then that may be the course of our life experiencing and trusting that, it's sort of like, I remember when I had toddlers and they would say, you know what, just kind of trust that their diet over the course of the week will work its way out. Like they'll get enough protein, they'll get enough, you don't have to micromanage every single meal. Right. And that's the same with us. Like we can trust that over the course of our lives, things may be more dominant, more of a focus for a while. And when it's something that you care about and you want to put your energy there, then go for it.
Mm.
And then recalibrate when that thing is over.
Why are values so important?
Well, values are intrinsic motivators. So a lot of us have extrinsic motivators, which are things outside of us that drive our behavior. So I'm going to do this thing so I'll make more money, or I'll do this thing so that the scale goes down on, in terms of lose weight, or I'll do this thing so I get lots of followers. And the nature of intrinsic motivators is that you never get to that finish line. It just keeps on moving out further. So maybe you do make that amount of money, but now the finish line is already moved out. You're spending more money, and so now you need to make more, or your peer group has just changed and they're all making more money than you, right? Same thing with weight loss, same thing with followers. And intrinsic motivators come from the inside. They don't have that sort of like moving finish line quality. They're energizing. They bring you a sense of vitality. They bring you a sense of purpose and meaning. And you never get there, but you are satisfied and motivated by the process of being in them. So values, those intrinsic motivators, are things like, I care about being a loving parent, or I care about being a psychologist that is present and is supporting people and opening up their lives. That's what I really care about, being a present psychologist today. I can act on that value in my therapy room for the rest of my life and never actually, be done with it. And the finish line never moves forward because I can act on it right here and now. So what we know is that when you have intrinsic motivators, you're more likely to keep at something. You're more resilient. You're more likely to get back on when you've fallen off, because it's not about some kind of external thing which you have less control over.
That is a very interesting point. I want to repeat that. So you're saying that the intrinsic motivators that we have, the things that say, I want to be a good parent, I want to show up as a present podcast interviewer today, that is going to be more motivating, and that's going to buffer my resilience, increase my resilience, more so than I want everyone to say that this is great.
Absolutely.
Or I want to avoid people saying it's not great.
Yeah, because it puts the power in your hands, in your body, in your actions. Because how many of us have showed up as a present parent or a present podcaster and it didn't go how we wanted it to go? Maybe the interview that we had was the other person wasn't the best interview, but we can focus then on, well, did I show up how I wanted to show up? Then it's a win, right?
Mm.
It's less about putting that outcome on something outside of you, which may or may not go your way. We've all had the experience of it not going our way. And then are we down on ourselves that we didn't lose weight, even though we've been exercising and really taking care of our bodies in a really loving way for the past X number of months? Well, then you're going to get defeated and depleted, and you won't want to keep doing it.
That is true. So, self-compassion. There are some common misconceptions around self-compassion. And I think I've heard some people say, well, that's going to turn me into somebody incredibly self-absorbed, or it's going to make me too soft, or any number of things, really. What are some of the misconceptions that you have heard that you try to dispel?
Well, I can tell you the ones that I believed and that actually I found them to actually be somewhat half-truths. Sometimes these misconceptions that we have, these myths that we have, there's like a kernel of a half-truth in there that we need to be conscious of. And so the three main half-truths that I wrote an article on this for Psychology Today because they were so prevalent in my practice and so prevalent for myself. But the three main ones that I see a lot are, one is, I fear that if I'm self-compassionate, I'm going to be selfish. The second is, I fear that I'm going to lose my edge. Like I got here because I was hard on myself, right? And I'm going to lose my edge. And then the third is, self-compassion is cheesy. It's kind of hokey. Especially when I'm working with teenagers or young adults, they're like, that is so cheesy to say self-love, right? So I actually think there's half-truths in each of those. The first one about self-compassion being selfish. Well, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of research that shows that if you are more self-compassionate towards yourself, you're probably going to be more compassionate towards others. I mean, we've all had that experience of walking in the door at the end of the day. We're feeling super exhausted, super frustrated. And what we really need is just an internal voice that tells us it's understandable that you're tired. It's been a hard day. Just take a big exhale and sigh, activate that vagus nerve and give yourself a break. If we do that for ourselves, and then our partner walks in or our dog walks in or our best friend calls us, we're probably going to show up for them a little bit better of a person, a little bit kinder, right?
Yeah.
So self-compassion does not make you selfish in that way. Actually, it will make you be able to show up for others in a more helpful way. But the half truth of that is that if you don't see, and there's research behind this, if you don't see self-compassion as a flow, that when I take care of myself, I'm better able to be there for you. And when you take care of yourself, you're better able to be there for me. When we don't see it as this harmonious flow of the way in which we are connected to each other, then it can be selfish because then it becomes all about me. And we live in a world where there is way too much selfing going on. I mean, even that word self and self-compassion, I recoil about, even though I have a book that has it in the title, there's a little bit too much selfing, right? So we do need to think about, and that was really intentional in writing the self-compassion journal, to make it be, it's not only about you folks. It's about when you take care of yourself in this way, how can you be the best version of yourself in the world? So that's the first half truth. The second one is the one that as a high achiever, I had struggled with, which is if I'm self-compassionate, I'll lose my edge. And there's actually another whole slew of research showing that the opposite is true. So everything from Berkeley students who they intentionally put these students on tests that are like impossible to do well on. So they fail these Berkeley students. And then half of the group is given a self-compassion intervention and the other half is told, you're really smart. You got into Berkeley. The folks that are given the self-compassion intervention, you failed this test because it was a hard test. We all fail tests like this. A lot of other people failed as well. So that common humanity and that kindness and that understanding, those students ended up studying harder for the next one than the students that were told that they were smart.
Weren't so disheartened.
So, yeah. So you're going to perform better because when you are understanding towards yourself, we all have had that experience. When someone is understanding to us, we want to actually work harder at something. But where I do think self-compassion makes you lose your edge a little bit and what I've experienced in my own life around losing my edge is that you lose your edge around stuff that doesn't really matter as much to you.
Oh, what
Because
happened
you,
to you?
yeah, yeah. So you start to realize, oh my gosh, I'm so busy cleaning my house to make it perfect for my friends to come over that I'm actually kind of like, you know, being irritated at my kids or being irritated at my partner. And that doesn't actually matter that much as having my friends over and being, hanging out with my kids and my partner before my friends come over. So you start to lose your edge around stuff that is less important to you because you're tuning in more to what it is that you need and what you care about really. And then you can put a lot of energy into the stuff that does matter to you, like studying for that test or whatever.
I guess I'm hearing it depends on the person really, but even in your own experience and that example of the housework, whether there was a moment of like, I can't let this go because it's how you've known yourself to be. So actually the process of letting there be some kids' toys hanging around or that all of the dishes aren't packed away, like, does that make you feel uncomfortable? Or would somebody listening who finds themselves in that to expect that discomfort because you're starting to change and operate in a different way?
Always, yeah. That's what growing feels like. That's what stretching feels like. If you learned a new language, expect to feel uncomfortable while you're trying to pronounce these words that you haven't pronounced before. Or if you're taking a new exercise class for the first time or learning a dance, expect to feel a little bit uncomfortable. That any time that we're doing this type of stretching into a new way of being, it's going to be uncomfortable. And then self-compassion can help with that too, because self-compassion is saying things like, of course, this is uncomfortable. You're trying something new. It's hard to try new things. It's hard to get out of a rut or a pattern or a way of being. And I know that you're doing this because there's something deep down inside of you that thinks that this might be helpful to you in some way. And if you have that deep down reason why, I'm not a big fan of just stretching ourselves for the sake of stretching ourselves. I'm a fan of stretching ourselves because it's connected to something that we value or that we care about that will evolve ourselves. And so there is that nature of discomfort that then we have the self-compassion to get there. And that's where the third half truth of it's cheesy comes in because it kind of is. It kind of is cheesy. I mean, this whole concept of self-love and, self-compassion or loving yourself the way that a good friend would love you. Yeah, it's kind of cheesy and it can be uncomfortable to do that too. But sometimes things that are cheesy are good for us, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for us.
So, what is one of the big learnings that you've had to have, Dr. Diana? Because looking back at some of your history, there was a period in your life where you did have your own starting over, and you dropped out of a PhD program and relapsed into an eating disorder. Can you tell us a little bit about that time for you?
Yeah, well, getting into a PhD program, my intention was to study eating disorders, actually. I had struggled with anorexia when I was 14, 15 years old, which then turned into bulimia. I was hospitalized. I had a pretty a rough go of much of my early teen years. And then I found my way in lots of different guides and supports to finding my way through recovery. And I remember when my husband and I packed up our U-Haul van and we were going to drive across to across the Rocky Mountains to go to Colorado when I was going to start this PhD program, making two commitments. And I told him, my two commitments in starting this program is number one, I'm committed to my recovery. And number two, I'm committed to my work to be helping others that have had as much suffering as I have been through. Like, I don't want other people to feel the way that I felt for as long as I felt. And then you take someone that has high achieving behaviors, a history of an eating disorder, and you put them in a cohort of other folks that are like super high achievers, right? And my old patterning just clicked in really quickly when I was in that PhD program of getting really perfectionistic, isolating, doing all the things that I tend to do when I'm stressed, super highly critical. And it wasn't that long in my first year that not only was I doing research in the arena of eating disorders, I relapsed into mine. And it was in that time, and I felt like such a fraud. This whole concept of imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah, I bet that came up hard.
Oh, it wasn't even, but it wasn't a syndrome. I was an imposter. I wasn't in the syndrome. I was actively in an eating disorder while I'm working with people with eating disorders. And so, I think others may relate to that. Maybe it's not that, but maybe it's they're presenting their outside world on social media in a certain way, and their inside world is really like far off from that presentation, right? And that feeling when there's that big discrepancy between how you want to be and how you're acting. And that's when I called upon this commitment again with my husband. I was like, I have to let it go.
Quick pause. If you're a regular listener to the show and you have found value in these episodes, I would be immensely grateful if you pledged your support. Reality is, podcasting is not a free venture. There are many behind the scenes costs. But with your support, you'll be able to help me fuel the growth of this podcast and keep bringing you bigger and better guests each and every week. And of course, the signature honesty and real talk, which I'm known for. So if you'd like to say thanks and support the show for less than a cup of coffee per week, you can click the link called Patreon in the show notes. Thanks so much in advance, guys. Back to the episode.
And the acceptance rate for these PhD programs. My program, the PhD. And so I withdrew and I ended up going to a yoga ashram and studying yoga. And there was a period of time where I was like, I'm going to be a yoga instructor. But the other part of that commitment to my husband, there was two commitments. It was like, my recovery comes first. And the other commitment was helping others go through, do it differently. And there was this shift that happened to me during that time where I realized, oh, it's actually because I've gone through this that I can actually maybe even do this better. I can do it differently.
That is empathy. That is real empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And willingness to go back. So I ended up going back and I studied mindfulness and it was back, this was a number of years ago, 15 years ago. So more than 15 years, or 20 years ago, how to bring these principles of what I was learning in my contemplative practice and bring it in combination with what I was learning about the science of psychology and research that. And I went on to research that and then run a treatment center for eating disorders afterwards. But that patterning, whether it's not necessarily going back to eating disorder behavior, but that patterning is still within me. And the patterning to get into those old ruts of perfectionism and comparison and pushing myself really, really hard. I'm more aware of it now, and I now have the skills and tools of how to respond when it shows up. And to me, that's balance. I mean, it's the imbalance and then finding your way back again.
And it's the power of self-awareness, which is so much about what this podcast is about. It's really about helping people to become more aware of their own tendencies and to start this healing journey as such, to gain awareness of what it is that they have experienced, why they are the way they are, in order to change it, in order to show up differently in the present and make different choices. And I think going back to your piece about the self-compassion, it's knowing and accepting and being graceful with yourself when that pattern does show up again, because it will. And especially when you're under stress, under pressure, it will show up even harder. And that's completely okay. And it's to be expected.
Yeah. There's a big part of self-compassion, which is being honest about what's happening and making contact with the fact that you're having a hard time. I mean, when you look at the lineage of compassion, it has these two components to it, which have to do with first acknowledging that you're suffering and then second, doing something about it. The acknowledging that you're suffering is an act of honesty. And in that moment when I decided I can't do this, it was actually me being aware and honest with where I'm at. Because many of us hide stuff and we think that, that we're hiding stuff. It's kind of protecting us from it, or we actually think we're protecting other people from it. but it's actually exposing it that sometimes is the most compassionate thing we can do, because then we can do something to help ourselves. And I don't mean you have to spew it out on a podcast. This is something that happened years and years ago. It wasn't until my 40s until I shared about what happened to me during that graduate school experience. But the combination of getting honest with yourself, acknowledging your suffering, and then doing something to alleviate it, that is the true practice of compassion.
Mm. Let's go to a bit about self-sabotage. So this is another, linked subject and something that you specialize in as well. And you say so many of us, we unknowingly hinder our own growth. Can you explain a little bit why this occurs?
Yeah, I think there's often 3 ways in which we hinder our own growth. The first way is that we avoid pain. And avoidance of pain is the root of a lot of our self-sabotage. Whether you're self-sabotaging by saying, I'm not going to apply for that job because it's too scary, or it's too hard, or I'm not going to talk to that person because I'm too anxious, or I'm going to drink when I get home from work because I'm too stressed, right? That we avoid pain. We evolve to avoid pain, but a lot of our pain isn't really that dangerous. It's more that it's psychological in nature. And the thing that would really help us the most is to approach what's difficult, because that's the psychological stretching that we were just talking about. So that's one way we self-sabotage. We avoid pain. The other way we self-sabotage is we cling and we grasp and we hold on to things that are changing. And we hold on to things that are too tight. We hold on to things too tight. So an example of that may be we self-sabotage because we're not willing to, move somewhere, change a relationship, change something about our identity or ourselves. We have this belief, we have beliefs about ourselves that we're grasping or holding on to, and it leads to self-sabotage as well. So for me, in graduate school, self-sabotaging was holding on so tightly to the identity of, I'm a PhD student treating eating disorders, therefore I cannot leave this program, right? We grasp too tightly. And then the third way that we self-sabotage is we get caught up in stories, in our narratives in our head that we believe to be true. And we just follow those narratives, and often they're old. A lot of them don't even belong to us. Things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I can't handle this. And then we end up getting sort of dug into these ruts and these holes in our life that are really hard to get out of because of the beliefs that we have about ourselves.
Yeah, I'm hearing all of that. What has been a particular difficulty for you in your own journey with self-sabotage?
Well, there's different ones. One that I tend to do a lot.
And can I say, let me just add to that, Diana, because what I do want to say is that self-sabotage occurs in almost everyone, if not everyone, surely. And it's not just, I think the common idea that people have is that it's going to be people who are not achieving anything, are those that are constantly self-sabotaging. And that's really not the case at all. It really occurs at all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. It occurs at all levels. And if we think about it, what is self-sabotage? It's our attempt to protect ourselves. We're trying to protect ourselves. So
it's our misguided self-love.
Yeah, it's misguided self-love. Exactly. We're protecting ourselves from that thing that's painful. So I'm not going to go do it. Right? I'm not going to sign up. Right? Or maybe we're trying to protect ourselves by being self-critical with that self-story about ourselves. Because if I'm self-critical, then maybe someone else won't critique me if I get there first. Then I'll be able to fix it before someone else points it out. Right? And for me, it shows up in so many different ways. I mean, one way that I tend to self-sabotage is often believing that other people's ideas about something are better than mine. And so I don't want to put my idea out there. I don't want to speak up about something, devaluing my perspective or my opinion. Or even as you'll notice, like as we're having this conversation, I always want to cite the research behind it, right? And that can be helpful. It's not bad, But if you're doing that a lot, if I'm doing that a lot, then all of a sudden it's like, well, do you always have to have a research reason behind something for it to have a value? Because, what if you believe that and it's right for you, right? So that's one way that I self-sabotage. But the other way I self-sabotage is when I am stressed, I tend to overschedule my life. And then 6 months later, I'm sitting in the consequences of way too many yeses. And I'm like super stressed. So that's a self-sabotage too, rather than when I'm stressed, slowing down, sorting out, figuring out what's most important here and letting some stuff go. And that's that's an attachment type of self-sabotage that I tend to do.
Mm. Thank you for the honesty there. And it is really interesting to see how it can show up in so many different ways for people. And it's really not just one size fits all. It's a lot. I want to move on to a bit around how we can cultivate self-compassion, particularly in our children and other people in our life, and whether it starts from ourselves first. And if we are not able to be self-compassionate, whether that means, going back to what you said before, that means that we're likely going to be less compassionate with others in our lives, with our children, with our partners, etc. But how can we go about cultivating self-compassion in our children so that they can grow up to be, the best version of themselves possible, with greater self-esteem, greater resilience and determination, a kind of inner voice, because I think so many of us need that too, right?
Yeah. So the other day I was sitting down having dinner with my son, and he had a salad and I had a salad, and he reached into his salad with his hands and he picked out a little pea, like a pea pod from it, and he was eating it. And I was like, don't put your hand in the salad and pick out a pea. Use your fork. And then a few days later, I was sitting down having lunch by myself, and I reached in my salad and I picked out a pea with my hand. I started
And you got
eating it.
scolded.
And I was like, I wonder where he learned that from. How many times have I told him to eat with a fork? And how many times have I totally unconsciously reached in my salad and picked out a little piece of something with my hand and ate it, right? We can say, be more compassionate to yourself 1,000 times over to a kid, or, I love you exactly as you are, or, and those are very helpful things to say. I'm not saying don't say them. And our kids observe us pre-verbally before they even have words. They're watching. Mothers, how are mothers looking at themselves in the mirror in the morning when they're putting on their clothes? Are they have like a critical look on their face, or they have a loving look on their face, right? And how are we, showing up and you can think about your parents, like the things that your parents did. Maybe they would never have told you that, but maybe they did it, and you kind of learned it through them doing it. So the first way we practice self-compassion is, if you want your kid to eat with a fork, then eat with a fork. Do it for yourself and actually learn to do it for yourself. And you will already be transmitting those messages to your children. And there's ways in which we can learn to respond to our children that help evoke some more, for them to practice more self-compassion. So, for example, if your child can't sleep at night, they're worried about something, one of the ways that we can help our children with developing self-compassion is just the simple practice of compassionate touch. So it's very soothing when you put your hand on your chest and your hand on your belly. And I'll go in and be with my kids and be like, why don't you just put your hand on your chest and your hand on your belly and take some long, slow breaths. And you can always put your hand on your chest and your hand on your belly whenever you need to just get connected to your body and slow your body down a little bit. We can also help our children develop self-compassion by how we talk to them about the different voices that they may have in their head, and that it's normal for everyone to have more kind of like a critical voice and a loving voice. And if they had a loving voice, who would it sound like? Who are the most loving voices? Like, is it their favorite kindergarten teacher, or their favorite coach, or their grandparent? What does that voice sound like? And if you wanted to, or maybe a spiritual figure, if you wanted to, you can ask that voice, even though they're not with you, you could ask them some questions if you needed it at some time. Because sometimes our critical voice is so loud, it's hard to hear. And you can start to help your children do what's called cognitive defusion, which is separate and from the voices in their head and start to choose more compassionate voices. So those are two ways that I teach them. And then the third one that I'm doing more with my kids are teenagers now. But the third way that I work with them, that I also work with my clients around, is embodying a compassionate posture. So if you're going up to the baseball, plate and you're about to swing the ball, and you take the posture of a baseball player, right? You can also take a compassionate posture right now by imagining strength in your spine, because a compassionate version of you is strong and solid like a tree. And you can also imagine really, really kind eyes, like really loving eyes, like smiling with your eyes. And then you can imagine your shoulders are soft and your heart is open. And when you have that solid, strong spine and soft shoulders and open heart and loving eyes, then you can walk into that difficult thing, whether it's getting up to give your book report or it's talking to your friend on the phone that you're kind of nervous to talk to. You can go in with that version of you, and it'll be the best version of you. So I also talk with them about embodying compassion as well.
That's beautiful. Such a contrast. I reflected on a saying that I heard a lot growing up, which was very frequently said, and that was, do as I say, not as I do.
Oh, yikes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I
That's
don't
a
know if that
common
was
one.
yeah, I think it is a common one, or at least it was. And
It's
I
a
look
cover
back at
up.
that now, isn't it? And I look back and I go, wow. Well, Dr. Diana would not agree with that one.
Yeah. Or maybe try and work harder to make what you say match what you do.
Yes.
Like that feels so congruent. Like we feel good when what we say is matching what we're doing.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly seen in my own son that his behavior and moods tend to be a reflection of mine in many respects. Like they're a little mirror to you in many ways, that they show you what you're doing, where you're at, and it can be quite confronting, I think, as a parent when you go, "Oh, yes, this is a reminder of the responsibility that you have."
Yeah, absolutely. And that we co-regulate each other, that our kids are so tuned in to their parents from day one. Like they're just, so tuned into the way that what you're looking at, the expression on your face, the tone of your voice, because that is their whole source of safety. It's the whole source of their life. Like they completely depend on you. And, I still have that with my mom. I can look at my mom's face and feel criticized just by a look on her face, even though she hasn't even said anything to me. So our kids are the same way with us. And we as parents can also practice how are we evoking and bringing in that most compassionate self with our kids as well. And that most compassionate self can include everything from our tone of voice, just the tone of your voice. When your kid is waking you up for like the millionth time in the middle of the night and you're going in one more time, just the tone of your voice and how you respond will change the likelihood of them either going to sleep or not going to sleep, right?
Sorry
Go
to
to
say,
bed.
yes. Sorry to say, folks.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
And putting in that little bit of work to be compassionate pays off eons, because then they're learning how to self-soothe themselves and how to internalize that for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. I'm going to move into the final fast few questions now, Diana. And the first thing I wanted to ask is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Well, it depends on the age. Can you give me an age? Because it would be different.
Yeah, let's go with your early 20s. Let's
Oh,
go
my
back to
early 20s.
the time when you were in your PhD, where you were struggling with the body image, eating
Mm-hmm.
disorder.
Mm-hmm. Um, I think that the advice that I would give her is that this is the course of your life. And you you think it's so embarrassing and horrible and you're so ashamed of it now. And then at some point you will be able to use this to understand somebody else's suffering and to help them. So it's not for naught, like the process of you figuring this out will benefit others.
Yeah.
And that, I think, would have been helpful for me just to get through that time, because I felt like it was never going to end, and I was in so much shame about it.
And shame hurts.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard one to sit with. I see that. I really agree. I look back and I had a time with a difficult separation from an ex-partner, and I remember thinking, and it got me through as well, I will be able to help with this story one day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that really helps you access that strength and the common humanity as well, in knowing that we all go through hard stuff. Everyone is at every moment. We just need to be kind and more supportive.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Second, what is something that you used to believe that you no longer believe about yourself in particular?
I used to believe that I was shy, and I no longer believe that. What I actually believe now, or my parents would say, "Oh, she's really shy," is that I have a tremendous inner world that needs tending to, and that requires me to have quiet time, alone time, time in nature. And it's not that I'm shy; it's just that I need tending to. My inner world needs tending to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And lastly, what is a closing message that you would like to share with listeners who are, whether they're on a healing self-development journey or seeking more balance and calm in their life? What would you say to
I
them?
think my closing message would be that you can practice balance and calm right here and right now in this next minute. And sometimes we're seeking, we're seeking, rather than practicing. So, what would be calming for you right now? Would it be your breath? Would it be feeling your feet on the floor? What would feel balanced for you right now? Would it be pushing yourself a little bit harder, or taking a little bit more of a break in a certain area? And that when you practice it in the here and now, then you're creating a future of more balance and calm.
Beautiful words to finish on, and really reiterating the importance there of the present moment. It can be so easy to project into the future, to learn all of these concepts in the abstract, and then actually to go about implementing them in our life in the right here, right now. That's where change actually happens. It's the only place where change can happen. And yeah, it's something that I think many of us often forget. And knowing that it can be simple too. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be really complicated, really time consuming, like little micro moments. To go back to what you said before, what is the micro adjustment that you can make to bring yourself into a little bit more balance, to show up a little bit better for yourself and for the people that you love? Dr. Diana, thank you so much for your time. Everyone listening, you can follow her online. All of her links are in the show notes. She also has a self-compassion daily journal and a book upcoming called Wise Effort.
Thank you so much for having me.